We will describe three great mysteries of science. Then we'll explore how ideas from an unexpected source may suggest solutions to these three great mysteries. These three great mysteries of science are: what and where are the 7 other dimensions of superstring theory? The double-slit experiment? And what is consciousness? We'll describe these three mysteries one at a time and then show how the unexpected source might shed light on a solution to these mysteries. Since the early 1900s, physics used 2 sets of formulas to describe the fundamental particles and forces of the universe. On the small scale, quantum field theory describes the 12 elementary particles of matter and the 4 elementary particles of energy. On the large scale, Einstein's law of relativity describes how gravity affects the movement of stars and galaxies. For decades, many physicists, including Einstein, tried unsuccessfully to combine these 2 formulas into one formula that could describe the very small and very large. Finally, in 1984, 2 physicists, John Schwartz and Michael Green, developed a single formula that describes both small and large. It's called superstring theory, and it says that all matter and energy is made up of tiny, vibrating strings. These strings vibrate in frequencies that correspond to the known particles of matter and energy, and it also describes gravity. But a surprising feature of superstring theory says that the strings vibrate in 10 dimensions. Today, practically all physicists still agree with superstring theory, but they are also puzzled by these 10 dimensions. We know about 4 dimensions of the physical world: height, width, depth, and time. But superstrings vibrate in 10 dimensions. Where are the other 6 dimensions beyond the 4 familiar physical dimensions? In 1995, at a superstring conference, Ed Witten announced that he could resolve slight problems with superstring theory by adding an additional 11th dimension that is a bit different from the other 10. So, in addition to the 4 physical dimensions of height, width, depth, and time, superstring theory now says that there are 7 other dimensions, and scientists are in the dark as to what and where they are. Another famous mystery of physics is the double-slit experiment, first performed over 100 years ago. Quantum mechanics says that electrons sometimes act like particles and sometimes like waves. If a beam of electrons is shot at a metal sheet with 2 parallel slits, an interference pattern appears on a second receiving sheet, as if the electrons were acting like waves. However, if someone looks at the electrons before they enter the double slits, the pattern they make on the receiving sheet shows 2 parallel lines, as if the electrons were acting like particles. Looking at the beam of electrons before they enter the slits changes their behavior from waves to particles. The great physicist Richard Feynman said that this double-slit experiment is impossible to explain in any classical way and is a great mystery of quantum mechanics. The third scientific mystery is the mystery of consciousness. We all experience consciousness, but science doesn't know what consciousness is. We know that we think, feel, and experience, but strangely enough, scientists can't figure out what is happening when we do these things. As David Chalmers wrote in 1995, conscious experience is at once the most familiar thing in the world and the most mysterious. There is nothing we know about more directly than consciousness, but it is extraordinarily hard to reconcile it with everything else we know. Why does it exist? What does it do? These questions are among the most intriguing in all of science. In summary, the 3 great mysteries of science we discussed are: what are the 7 other dimensions of superstring theory? Why do electrons that are looked at change from acting like waves to particles? And what is consciousness? We will now look for clues to these 3 mysteries in an unexpected source. We will examine 2 symbols that are in the first 5 books of the Bible and see if they can help decipher the 3 scientific mysteries we discussed. The 2 biblical symbols are, first, the table and the menorah in the entry room of the temple, And second, the fringes that are attached to four-cornered garments. The second book of the Bible is called Exodus, and it describes, among other things, how to build the temple that was the center of worship. The temple had an inner room where the head priest entered one day a year on Yom Kippur. In front of the inner room was an entry room that contained a table and a menorah. Every Friday, fresh bread was placed on the table, and the bread from the previous week was given to the priests to eat. Next to the table was a menorah that had 6 curving arms and a central shaft. On top of each of the menorah's 7 arms were oil lamps that were lit each morning. The fourth book of the Bible, called Numbers, says that we should attach fringes to the corners of four-cornered garments. Each corner of the garment should have attached to it 6 white strings and a 7th blue string. It says that looking at these fringes should encourage us to fulfill our spiritual obligations. Let's examine these symbols. The table and the menorah consists of a pair of symbols. The table is a rectangle with 4 sides. The menorah has 6 curving arms and a 7th central arm. The four-cornered garment and its fringes also is a pair of symbols. The garment is a rectangle with 4 sides. Each of the fringes attached to its corners have 6 white strings and a 7th blue string. The similarity between the 2 sets of symbols is apparent. In both, there's a rectangle plus 6 plus 1 string-like things. What is being communicated to us through these symbols? According to tradition, these symbols represent the idea that the world has 2 realms. The table and the garment represent the physical realm. The table with its bread and the garment refer to our physical needs for food and clothing. Each is a rectangle with 4 sides, similar to the 4 familiar dimensions of the physical world: width, height, depth, and time. If the table and the garment represent the physical realm, evidently the menorah and the fringes represent another realm of the world. According to tradition, there is a spiritual realm that they represent. With both the menorah and the fringes, the numbers 6 plus 1 play a role. The menorah with its 6 curving arms and its 7th central arm, and the fringes with its 6 white strings and 1 blue string. The Talmud says that the central arm of the menorah and the blue string of the fringes represent a higher level of spirituality, in the same way that the Sabbath has a higher level of spirituality than the 6 days of the week. Isn't it interesting how these symbols bear an uncanny resemblance to superstring theory? You'll recall that the tiny strings of superstring theory vibrate in 11 dimensions. In addition to the 4 familiar dimensions of width, height, depth, and time, it's a mystery where the other 7 dimensions are. With just a small leap of imagination, we can suggest that the 7 arms of the menorah and the 7 strings of the fringes correspond to the 7 other dimensions of superstring theory. What is this other realm of the world, the so-called spiritual realm, represented by the menorah and the fringes, and might be associated with the 7 other dimensions of superstring theory, with the 7th dimension being somewhat different than the other 6? We want to suggest that this other realm involves the following elements: spirituality, consciousness, emotions, relationships, and music. We're all familiar with this realm as we navigate the ups and downs of consciousness, emotions, and relationships on a daily basis. Perhaps it's the way that the vibrating strings of our consciousness harmonizes with other people that explains why we get along with some people better than others. And perhaps it's this resonating consciousness among people and subcultures that accounts for the bond that people feel towards each other. And the idea is that somehow all this activity involves 7 dimensions. After examining these symbols from the Bible, the table and the menorah, and the garment with its fringes, we can now suggest answers to our 3 great mysteries of science. Perhaps the 7 other dimensions of superstring theory lie in a realm referred to by the menorah and the fringes that is somehow related to spirituality and consciousness. Regarding the double-slit experiment, perhaps it's this realm of consciousness that, when focused on electrons, changes their behavior from waves to particles. and perhaps our consciousness exists in the seven-dimensional area predicted by superstring theory. Our task now is to investigate and delve deeper into understanding this other realm, the realm that is represented by the menorah and the fringes, and perhaps involves the seven other dimensions of superstring theory.